Hey everybody, this is Everyday Commentary, and this is a video overview of this knife. This might have been my most hotly anticipated knife of 2021, and as of March, the middle of March, I have a review sample in my hand, and I'll go into a little bit about what I know about this knife, talk about what I like and what I don't like, and then give you a sort of an assessment that's pending more data, and that'll come out in the written review. So first of all, what is this? This is the Tactile Knife Company's Rockwall. It is Will Hodges who makes the tactile turn pens, not tactile, not tactical, tactile, like touching. He's known for this really fine ribbing that he does in the machining. This is his side clicky. This is one of the better EDC pens available. I love this pen. And this is his first foray into the knife world. It's called the Rockwall. It is, as you can see, a flipper knife. It is not a frame lock, which I think is a great idea. And it runs on ceramic bearings and has CTS XHP blade steel. The knife retails for around $300. They are available in limited quantities on tactileknifecode.com, and I think that Will is scaling up for production. So let me talk to you a little bit about the knife before we get into what I like and what I don't like. I'm sorry. The blade length here is right at 3 inches. My guess is this knife weighs somewhere between 2.5 and 3 ounces. As you can see, it has a deep carry over the top pocket clip, and it is a right hand pocket clip only. This is not a frame lock, as I said. It is a liner lock, and the locking liner is nested inside the titanium handle. So Will and I have talked a lot via email ever since I started reviewing his pens, and his pens have always been consistently great. And not only did they start out good, but they got better over time. And Will has incorporated a lot of changes that make his pens much, much nicer. So if you have an early pen of his, you can see how much he's improved. He took all of that information, all of that knowledge, and he poured it into making a knife. There was a sort of box cutter paper letter opener that he did that was in a pen body, and it had a little blade that came out. And that was okay. My big fear with that one was it looked too much like a pen, and I would hate to like take it into court accidentally. So I was not a huge fan of that, but it was sort of like a proof of concept. And Will has invested a lot of time and research and money into new machines, and he's produced this knife. And I have to tell you, this knife blew me away. Like the moment it came out of the box, and the box was really clever. It was a magnetized wood case, and this had like a little cutout that fit just this. It sunk down in there. The moment I pulled out the box and then opened this knife, I knew right away it was a fantastic, fantastic blade. So let's first do some size comparisons, because this is a knife most people haven't seen, and I want to make sure you guys understand how big it is. So there's the knife, and there it is right up next to my Benchmade mini grip, which I often use as a size reference. Here's the knife on top of a US dollar. And then here's the knife in profile next to a AA battery. So you can see that this knife is pretty darn slim. It's significantly slimmer than a AA battery, and it's slimmer by a substantial margin than the already pretty slim mini grip. So let's talk a little bit about what I like. So Will's texture is probably on a pen is probably too fine for a knife. It really wouldn't add all that much grip. So what he did is he made the texture a little bit bigger, but it still evokes that tactile turn look and feel. And so you know instantly that this is a knife that was done by Will Hodges. And I love the texture. It is absolutely phenomenal. It makes the knife look good, and it makes it, just grippy enough in your hand that it's not going to slide out. So that is an excellent, excellent thing. It is both functional and a design cue to Will's prior work, which lets you know this is his knife. The other things that I really like, I love the simple blade shape. It's just a simple regular drop point. There's no craziness. I like the shape and size of the flipper tab. It's not what Nick calls a pocket pecker. It's just the right size. I also like the clip. You know, one of the things that I've always criticized people for is their off angle or off centered clips. And most of the time what happens is the clip being off centered causes the knife to roll, or the device to roll in your pocket. And so you'll end up with a knife, like that, or it'll wad up your pocket, the fabric on the edge of your pocket. And this is something that happens, for example, on my Skeletool, my Leatherman Skeletool. Here, it's not off center enough to really cause a problem, and the weight distribution is not really all that off. So as a result, this pocket clip being off center doesn't really bother me whatsoever. It does, however, look really great, and it absolutely disappears. Absolutely disappears. Again, it's going to hit this part right here where it just kind of vanishes in your hand, and you got good grip. Obviously, with a flipper, the flipping action is really important, and I can tell you that the flipping action here is absolutely sublime. It is really, really great. I mean, this knife is one of the better flippers. The only knife that I have that's like clearly a better flipper, and it's probably the best flipper I've ever handled, is this knife, the Brian Nadeau Sharp by Design Micro Evo. This is really one of the finest pocket knives you can get, and it's not an exaggeration to say that these two are competitors with each other. This one's a little bit more expensive. It has a slightly different steel, but man, these are both really good knives. So let's go back and talk a little bit about what I don't like. And there's not a lot I don't like, because I like the aesthetics, I like the size, I like the flipping action. So one thing that I think that people will criticize the Rockwall for, which I don't really have an issue with, is people will say that the detent is a little light. So, you know, one of the things that I like on a detent is, let me set this aside for a second and sort of show you a variety. So this is what I would think of as a really crisp detent, meaning there's no movement here at all on the detent until I really push down, and then when I do, it's automatic. The next step is open. There's no in between. Now compare that to the detent on this knife, which is the A. Purvis Progeny MR, and it has a bronze washer system instead of bearings, but it has a detent as well. So here you can kind of get a little bit of squish, and then it kind of pops open. But there's not a whole lot of squish before that happens. On the Rockwall, the detent is not as sharp as those knives. So you can definitely fail fire this thing, because the detent is not as sharp as it would be on another knife. Now, the detent not being as sharp or as crisp might be something that people like, especially if you're not somebody that's used to flippers. Having a really hard or crisp detent oftentimes is like, what am I doing? So like my 10-year-old son, who happens to like knives probably almost exclusively because I like them, he doesn't like a really hard detent. He would prefer a softer detent. And I think that, you know, the one thing that I would say about this detent is, while it is softer and it does allow for fail fires like that, if you make a concerted effort, you're never going to have a fail fire. It's always going to open, and it's going to open with authority. It just means that you can't do this. You can't sort of like lazily put your finger on the detent. Whereas you could rest your finger on this guy all day long and get nothing. I mean, just nothing. Boom. That is super, super crisp. So I do think that some people are not going to like the detent. And I think that that's probably a matter of preference, though it is almost, it's light enough that I think we're in that area where if you said the detent is wrong, I wouldn't disagree. I would prefer to have a harder detent, but I can see why they left the detent where it was, especially on their first knife. The other thing that I will tell you is that I've had to retighten the pivot screws at least twice, and the reason why is because over time the pivot gets looser and the blade wanders off to the side opposite the locking leaf, which is not uncommon. I have not yet put Loctite on there, though I probably will end up doing that to just stop the constant tinkering. But that's not something that I want to see on a knife that's this price. It's pretty easy to tweak, and I do think that it's fair to say that you can make a knife and require the user to tweak it, because I think that gives you a little bit more customization. We have this idea in the knife world that something comes out of the box and it must be perfect to your specific tastes. And there's really no way to do that. You know, in the woodworking world, when you get a plane, you're expected to tune it yourself. Like, they don't put the final grind on the blade, on the blade for the plane. You're supposed to do that so that you can get it exactly the way you want. And I think that that's not unreasonable in knives. Like, I think that, you know, there are some knives where the grind, by the way, the grind and the edge here are just fabulous. They're super sticky. There are some places where the knife, in the knife world, where you get a good grind but not a great grind, or not a great edge on the knife. And the idea that, you know, a knife fails because you have to sharpen it is kind of stupid. Because if you can't sharpen your knife to get the edge you want when you first buy it, you're never going to be able to sharpen it when the edge goes away. So I'm not going to dock anybody for points for that. This is a little different, though. I do think that it's not a matter of tuning, that I have to constantly go in and tweak the pivot screws. And the way that you can tell it's time to tweak the pivot screws is when there's a little bit of blade play. Right now, this thing is like really, really locked in. And so the first time I did it, I didn't put a lot of pressure on it. I just wanted to see how it would work. The second time I did put some pressure on it, and it has not moved in over a week. So I think that that might have been the trick. That might have been the thing I needed to do to get it to work. So this is why, you know, an overview or a video overview is not the final pronouncement on the knife. If after that second tweak where I used a little bit of force, it stays good for, you know, the rest of the time, then I'm not going to dock any points on the final review because of the pivot screws. If it, however, requires subsequent tinkering, then I probably will dock at a point. One thing that I wanted to point out, these are both loose, so the pivots are non-captured. I prefer it to have one side captured and one side loose, and that way you can tighten it with a single screw or a screwdriver. In this case, what I have to do is I have to put a bit in on one side, hold it with my finger, and then tighten the screw with a bit on the other side to get it to really lock in. It's not a big deal, but it's something that I would like to see done differently on a subsequent production run. So that's an overview of the Tactile Knife Co. Will Hodges Rockwall. This is an absolutely stunning, great knife. It's an incredible first entry for Will into the knife world. There are two small things that are easy to tweak that I think might warrant subsequent revisions, but overall, this is an amazing knife. And if the pivot screw stays locked in, I would expect a very, very good score. I really, really like this knife a lot. So that was my overview of the Tactile Knife Co. Rockwall. By the way, the knife retails for $300.